Well, hello. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's always so exciting to be around people who are excited about their future, because it really is all about the future. I am so thrilled to be on the panel talking about people, because that's what I think about all the time. And I so enjoyed listening to the panel talking about the planet, because in some ways we're in a flipped situation. That we actually, those who accept that we were in trouble regarding our environment and the planet, we know why we needed to act regarding the planet, but we weren't sure what to do. And we're learning what to do, and we're learning it rapidly. When it comes to people, the notion of all people being able to participate, prosper, thrive, reach their full potential, all people, we know what to do, but we don't seem to know why to do it. Let me tell you what I mean. We actually know how to make sure that all can participate and reach their full potential. If I describe to you a place where a huge population of a state, only 50% of the people had a high school diploma, infant mortality is very high, other health issues quite prevalent, job skills at a very low level, you would think, it's going to be tough to do anything about that place. But you know, that place was California in the 1940s, 1950s, just coming off of World War II. And that population was overwhelmingly white. What California did is it rolled up its sleeves and it created the best education system, the best health system, the most productive population that the country had ever seen. And by 1962, the Newsweek headline was "Booming California, the country's #1 state," because they really did equity. They made sure that those who needed an investment got the investment that they needed. We know how to make sure that people can participate. We've done it over the years. We've done it mostly from a moral place, that we realized that black people were starting with a disadvantage, that many people who are Latino are coming into the same communities that had not served black populations well and had a disadvantage. And out of the goodness of people's hearts, from a moral place, from a conviction that it is not right to leave people behind, we've learned how to educate people. We've learned how to make sure that people can get in the workforce. We've learned how to deal with infant mortality and obesity and all of those issues, but we've learned it in increments. What we see are little islands of excellence here and there, a place where a neighborhood got it right, a community that can say 25% of the population that was not doing well is now improving. We know what to do. We haven't done it at scale, and it's because we haven't really understood why we need to do it at scale, why we need to do it beyond the moral imperative. We are rapidly becoming a nation in which the majority will be people of color very soon. You know the date, 2043. The majority of people in this country will be Latino, Asian, Native American, African American, mixed. What you may not know is since 2012, the majority of all babies born in this country have been of color. That by the end of this decade, by the end of 2019, the majority of all children 18 and under will be of color. In California, 73% now of all children 18 and under are of color. What you may not know is that by 2030, the majority of the young workforce will be of color. When you think about all of the challenges that you are facing here and determined to fix, when you think about becoming a model for the nation, when you think perhaps that you could be a model for the world, I would suggest that if you don't get the inclusion agenda right, you don't have the right to stand as a model, and no one will look to you as a model because you will not be a model. Getting the inclusion agenda right has become a national and an economic imperative. It will always be a moral imperative, but it has become a national and an economic imperative. We're not going to solve the problems that we've talked about in terms of the planet if we don't get comfortable living next door to the other. We're not going to get out of our cars and use public transit in the ways that we need to if we're not comfortable sitting next to the other. We are not going to be able to stop being a throwaway nation if we don't understand that our future requires that we live together, that we live in dense communities, and we have a lot to overcome before we get there. What we've seen happen is that as communities have discovered new urbanism and they understand how wonderful it is to be older, to live in a community, to age in place, as young people are returning to cities and really seeing the vibrancy there and understanding how enriching it is to live around rich culture, inevitably, as those places become hot, the people of color get pushed out. The people who were there during the hard times don't get to stay and enjoy the good times. We can't keep doing that. We've got to overcome all of these notions about who gets to live where, under what circumstances, if we're going to live in the ways that we were just talking about earlier. If we're going to be competitive in a global economy, we have to be able to tap the human capital that exists in our communities. We have to tap all of it, not just some of it. If we are going to have a democracy that we can be proud of on the world stage, it has to be one in which all can participate. These notions of equity, and when I use that term, I mean just and fair inclusion into a society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. That's all I mean. This equity agenda has become the thing that we have to bake in. We can't do it as an afterthought. We can't do it on the side. We can't do it when we get everything else in place. We have to lead with it. And leading with it will help us. It won't slow us down. When you think about this notion of who do you have in mind when you're solving a problem, it really is important to think about those who are most vulnerable right from the beginning. The example I like to use to make that point is those cutouts in the sidewalk. Those cutouts in the sidewalk, those curb cuts, they're there because of the advocacy of people with disabilities. Those curb cuts are there so that people with disabilities could fully realize the rights that they had fought for and won in terms of being able to have access to jobs and public accommodations and all of the things that people should have access to. But just to have a right and not to be able to do it if you were in a wheelchair was a hollow right. Through further advocacy of people with disabilities, particularly people in wheelchairs, we got those cutouts on the curb. But how many times have you been pushing a baby carriage and been so happy you didn't have to pick that contraption up to go from one corner to the other? How many times have you seen workers pulling wagons and pushing carts and had their work made easier because of those curb cutouts? How many times have you been pulling a suitcase across town like me trying to catch a train and you made it? Or had your mind at ease because your new bike rider was traversing the city, sidewalk to sidewalk, not riding in the streets? When we solve problems for those who are most vulnerable, we solve them for everyone. So by saying, here is our toughest challenge, leading with it, bringing the lens of how do we make sure that this strategy, this new initiative, this innovation, this new frontier is going to benefit everybody. We've got to start by thinking about those who need it most, and we will have tremendous benefits that will flow across the board. As we think about the equity agenda and the economy, we know what to do. We know that we have to grow good jobs and we have to connect them to people who need them most. We've had a movement across the country called community benefits that has moved out of people having to picket on the outside of a new development or a new venture into planning departments, into City Hall, so that we now have people who are making the decisions on the front end, thinking about the benefits that have to flow to all. In Oakland, California, when the Oakland Army base, which had just been abandoned for 25 years, finally now is being developed into an international logistics center, A year before they broke ground, they set up a job training center to begin to train people in the poorest neighborhoods, Latinos, African Americans, Southeast Asians, to be ready for those jobs. So by the time they actually started, they had a workforce that was getting prepared. They decided that 25% of all the apprenticeship hours would go to those hardest to place, veterans, long-term unemployed, people who were formerly incarcerated. They've really carved out the entrepreneurial opportunities to make sure they're available to low-income people in the community, taking something they were going to do anyway, leading with equity, and bringing this forward in a way that connects the people who need the most to living wage jobs, to career pathways, to educational opportunities. We need to make sure that we are also building the capabilities that we're going to need for the future. 21st century jobs are going to be very demanding, and it is really too bad that so many people in this country will not be ready for those jobs if we don't step up to do something about it. By 2020, 47% of all jobs will require at least an associate's degree. Only 28% of African Americans, 28% of Latinos, and 15% of foreign-born Latinos have it. We need to take a lesson from Tennessee, where the governor there has signed a bill saying that anybody who graduates from college can have free 2 years of community college education, and anybody who finishes the community college gets to start 4-year as a junior, cutting a 4-year degree cost in half and really creating a pathway for people to get the education that we need for 21st century. We no longer can talk about K-12. We need to talk about preschool through an associate's degree at a minimum. We all need to think about ways to do that. And I'm going to be watching Tennessee very carefully, because while I think that is fabulous, we also know that if you don't target, if you don't reach out, if you don't work with the high schools, if you don't work with the elementary schools, even though community college is free, those who need it most may not get it. We've got to focus on building capabilities and making connections to 21st century work. We also have to be sure that we are reducing the housing and the transportation burden. Too many families have no ability to build wealth because they pay too much of their income for housing, they pay too much of their income for transportation. Good public transportation systems, affordable housing, those are absolutely essential for building where we need to get in the future. But we need to make sure that we don't do what we have done in the past, and that is put the affordable housing in the communities that have no opportunity. Everybody needs to live in a community of opportunity. What sense does it make to take a community with failing schools, with no grocery stores, with complete isolation, and put the affordable housing there? We need to put affordable housing where there's opportunity. And the last thing we need to do is consciously remove barriers and expand opportunity. We need to do something about these incarceration scandal in this nation. Not only is it hurting those people who have been incarcerated, many for offenses that didn't deserve it, but we've created a legacy of absence in communities, that families and children are left without the fullness that they need in order to thrive. And we need to create pathways to real opportunity. And that will happen when we realize that every community needs to be a community of opportunity, with good schools and jobs and public transit and healthy environments where you can exercise and have access to fresh fruits and vegetables and everything else that is important. Equity. Equity is no longer only a moral imperative. It has become a national and an economic imperative, and the economy that we want will be an economy that has led with equity, that is committed to being equitable, and that understands that equity is the superior growth model. Thank you.
Riveting as always.
Thank you.
Angela, you alluded to really essentially changing the status quo and doing things differently than we have in the past. Sometimes in neighborhoods, in government, or in levels of authority, there is a resistance to change. There is a resistance to, changing the status quo. It's easier to keep doing the things that you've already been doing. How do you address just changing the status quo in terms of bringing this equity model to the forefront?
The status quo is changing. The status quo is changing. Now, coming here yesterday, I ran into someone in the airport, a woman just about my age. I don't know how old she is. She probably doesn't know how old I am. But I'd say we are in about 5 years of each other. And she is a giant in the field of early childhood education. And she got in line right behind me, and I was so happy to see her. And I said, oh, you must be so busy because early childhood education is front and center everywhere. She said, yeah, people keep asking me when I'm going to retire. She said, this is the moment I have been waiting for. And I said, funny, I say that to people all the time. This is the moment I have been waiting for. We are having a national conversation about race, thrust into our living rooms in the most horrible way. We all have to be sick on our stomachs by what is finally coming out for all to see that people in the black community have always known about. But we're having a national conversation about race. The data that I'm putting out about the changing demographics, I didn't discover it. I'm not the only one saying it. You probably are hearing about it every place you go. It is becoming obvious that our fates are intertwined, that we cannot go on as a nation if we don't repair the sins of the past and prepare ourselves for the productivity and the contribution of the future. The time is now. People are listening. People are wanting to talk about this who never have before. So I think timing is one thing, and it is true. We know what works. The tagline for PolicyLink is lifting up what works. We have deep knowledge about what to do. We need political commitment, we need public commitment, and we need to put our resources where they have to be, not just for those who've been left behind, but for everyone. Thank you.